Good morning and welcome to this week's recruitment discussion with Jump. Uh, this week, well, what are we going to do this week? This week, what we're going to start to look at is, it helps if I have the right script up there.
I was
This
going to
week,
say, H, if you don't know, we're all stuffed.
yeah, well, it's an interesting one when you can't see the discussion that you've got, and someone's moved the discussion on a little bit because you've been writing so much stuff this week. Anyway, our latest webinar series this week, because last week we finished a 4 week webinar series, and this week's a new week. And this week we're looking at the next 4 weeks. We're going to look at the growth window, and we're going to cover this week. In today, we're going to look at stabilisation, why surviving the downturn doesn't mean that you're ready for what's coming. And then next week, we're going to look at your model is only half the story, looking at cross revenue streams and the bits that agencies really miss. Then we're going to look at what's really changed in the market. Consultants can fill jobs, but can they actually win clients? And finally, we're going to look at stop filling jobs and start owning your marketplace. And this is all about helping recruitment agencies' strategy, their consistency, and helping them to win business, irrespective of the size of the market and the conditions. So as always, if you're watching on our social channels, YouTube, Instagram, etc., please subscribe. That would be amazing. I'm going to, as always, kick off with a couple of stats. And the stats this week are running on from the stats of last week and a couple of weeks, but they start to sort of get a little bit more interesting. So the Office of National Statistics published in March this year 3 years of consecutive declining UK vacancies. Then for the first time since 2022, that number went flat, and that was at 721,000 roles. Not growing yet, but no longer falling. So that's the stabilization looks like. That's what it looks like. And most agency leaders that I speak to haven't really understood that has really happened. In February 2026, the temporary billing index returned to growth for the first time in 3 months. The analysts call that the early sign of market recovery, and the service PMI hit a 5 month high of 54. Neil Carberry, the CEO of REC, said the trend of stabilisation has defined 2026 so far, and the head of KPMG said exactly the same. The Bullhorn survey of over 2,500 recruitment agencies also found that 56% reported revenue growth in 2025, up 40% on the year before. So the market's turned. And for those who are wondering what the PMI index is, and I think a lot of recruitment leaders tend to look at their own data and not look at outside the
Yeah,
data.
it's a good one to look at.
The PMI index is the Purchase Managers Index. It's a monthly survey that's sent out to purchase managers across the UK, and it's the government asking whether their business conditions are looking at orders, employment, output, deliveries, stock levels. Have they improved, stayed the same, or worse? The key number in that index is anything above 50 says the index the business is the UK is growing. Anything below 50 says it's contracting. So the UK number was 54. Recruitment numbers, because it goes really in depth. Perm index is 46.9. That's the highest it's been in the last 18 months. Temporary index is 50.3. So it's returning to growth for the first time in 3 months. So it's starting to show the early signs of recovery is what normally happens after a recession. And let's start to use that word because it really was a recession. Temp and contract comes back, followed by perm. Dave's with us today, so welcome, Dave. So we're going to kick off because we're going to look at some very interesting conversations today and have some very interesting comments. I'm really interested for you to join in and help us sort of push through these comments. So, from everything you're seeing with clients right now, Dave, how big is the gap between what most recruitment leaders believe is happening in the marketplace and what the data is actually telling us is happening in the marketplace?
Well, I'm going to start, morning H, morning everyone, with a bit of encouragement. I think that gap is much closer than it has ever been. I think leaders have woken up to exactly what's going on around with the stats, with all the data, with what their clients are telling them. And I think when they're sitting down, they are fully aware of what the market's like. We got caught out a little bit last year because we all believed and hoped it was going to be better than it was. I accept totally that there were a number of organizations that did really well in 2025, but for the most part, 2025 was a frustrating year for most of us running recruitment businesses. But what that's led to is more intelligence at the board about what's going on, about what the trends are, and what we should do. And I think the boards of recruitment companies, whether you're a five-person company or a 50-person company, are now looking at the stats, are now looking at the data, are now listening to their clients and to their consultants and what's being said. And for the most part, I think they're acting on it, they're taking it on board, they're looking at their own trends and seeing, well, this is what happened last time this happened, this was the output, this is what we did, and the learning from it. And I would just encourage any of you who are running businesses who aren't on top of those numbers, get on top of them because it will help you, as we'll talk about today, in planning for the upside.
So it's interesting. I think when I wrote the question, I had to sort of sit down and sort of think, well, I've got to answer the question at some point, so I may as well sort of think about it
Yes.
now. And I think most leaders benchmark themselves against where they were in 2022 when it was absolutely booming, rather than against where the market is right now. And that sort of comparison gives them a false read on both their position and their progression. And most recruiters get their data from their systems and then from people like Rec and ONS, Absco and other recruitment sources. Very few go out of their own doorstep or go beyond their own doorstep and truly look at what the market conditions are like. And the vast majority of that data that they get is from recruiters, other than the ONS job site. So it's a bit like sort of marking your own homework. We need to understand our clients' market, not just the recruitment market and the demands that the clients want from the recruitment market, because that's the bigger issue. What's affecting headcount is one thing, but what's actually affecting the marketplace? And I think data shows selective growth happening in specific segments, but most leaders are not tracking it because they're too close to their own business numbers to see the wider picture. And I think there's a problem with that. And the recruitment agencies that see growth the fastest have stopped waiting for the market to come back.
Yes.
In
Yeah, agree
fact,
with that.
most of the clients that I'm dealing with at the moment, in fact, didn't wait to start. They started 2 years ago, and that's why they had a good 2025 and a good 2026. And I think that new normal is what's happening. And the difference, I think, is in the thinking of the leader. They saw an opportunity and they went out rather than thinking, I need to survive. So the honest truth is that most leaders don't actually know what's happening in their true marketplace. They know what's happening in their business and what's happening in their headcount and what have you, but they don't actually know what's happening in their true marketplace. And they think they do because they're in it every day.
Yeah.
But being busy in a marketplace is very different from understanding it. And I think we're going to talk about that quite a lot today. So you can make true informed decisions only when you truly know what's happening in your marketplace rather than what you think is happening in the marketplace. So let's move on that. You know, we both sit inside a lot of recruitment agencies. What are the habits that you keep seeing that made complete sense in 2023, 2024, but are now quietly working against growth?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote down three parts to this as I was thinking about it, Howard. The first one in the last 18 months, treating AI as a writing shortcut rather than as a research engine. So most firms adopted AI to speed up job ads, to outreach copy. But now the table stakes and the candidates can smell that. We all know when we've been AI'd. So the firms pulling ahead are the ones that are using AI upstream. They're using mapping, the talent intelligence, client insight. So it's not just at the output stage. Another one for me is contingency first as the default order. They've literally said, well, we've always done contingency. We'll continue to approach the market with contingency rather than looking at some other services, which we can come on to. And the third one that I thought about is that building the brand through the business as people did in 2024, not through people. So the play always was follow our company through the company page. Whereas we know now that individual consultant voices, real opinions, real sector knowledge, that's what builds trust. That's what generates inbound responses. And I think that's really important. A firm with five visible, credible, individual voices outperforms one with a nice logo and a quiet LinkedIn presence.
It's interesting. Now just ticking off everything that I was going to say and cross those out. So
Oh, I
I
haven't been
think
cheating, honest. I've not been looking
it's,
over your shoulder.
it's
Honest,
all
God,
right.
wasn't me. Wasn't me.
It's all right, Dave. I love going second because then I've got to think sometimes. I think one of the big things is that, 2023, 24, 25, people keeping the headcount lean. And that made
Yeah,
absolute revenue sense when in
yeah,
certain times. But that lean team now, the capacity is a constraint when the market starts to move. However, we discussed this a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? When we talked about recruiting new heads is also not the answer. It's about retaining and developing the team that you've already got until the market conditions go beyond that stabilization phase where it goes into this is actually what's happening. Because if you go dip again and you add a load of heads in, then you might be losing money. So I think that's the first thing I'd look at. I also looked at something that you were sort of alluding to, but didn't quite push into that conservative BD practice that happened, waiting for warm leads to come through because I've got a great marketing
yeah,
email out there rather than going out and building new relationships. That was the sensible way to protect margin because it was cost effective to send an email rather than having people out of the office. Now it means that the pipeline is thin because everyone's getting 1,000 emails a day into a growth period. And that connects said about market data. If you don't know where your market is growing, don't know where to point BD effort. And if you're only pointing your BD effort in one direction through email rather than actually going out and speaking to your clients and understanding your clients, then you're missing an awful part of the marketplace. The daily focus on delivery over development again was the right call in 2023 because the market was new, and that meant every temp, every contract placement, you know, brilliant. But now it's changed. So have we created teams that are brilliant at filling roles, but have quietly forgotten how to win? And I think that's a big gap in the marketplace that our business development, and we see this, we have this conversation all the time, that people have got to go back to proper old school business development with new techniques and new ways of actually attracting your clients and candidates rather than what they were doing before. And I think some leaders have become so focused on not losing that they've completely forgotten how to win. And
yeah.
I genuinely think they've forgotten how to win. And the thing is that they've convinced themselves that caution is still a smart move when it's not. Now the market's started to move, you've got to have a really good conversation with yourself about stick or twist and what you're going to do. Those that are twisting are starting to really move quickly. Those that are sticking are starting to fall behind. So the next sort of muse, when you sort of run a proper growth audit with recruitment leads, and we go and audit a lot of clients, what is the question that tends to create the most discomfort in the room, and why does it land so hard?
Yeah, I thought a lot. There's lots of questions, obviously, we asked to try and get under the skin of what's going on in the business. But I think for me, one of the key ones is show me how your people are able to articulate your plans for the business. Show me how your people are able to articulate your plans for the business. Because often when we're sitting with leaders, they know what they want to achieve. They have the strategy, they own the strategy, they may have a board that helps to implement that strategy. But certainly in companies of a certain size, when it gets down to the desk or to the support services or to the people who aren't as often engaged in the clients, people just don't know. And sometimes they're just relying on, well, I just do what I'm told to do. And actually, we're missing a trick. If they can't articulate, if our consultants can't articulate, this is the journey my business is on. This is why we do what we do. This is what it means to you, to the candidate. This is what it means to you, the client. If they can't talk about the market with the intelligence that's needed, then they're behind the game because the ones that are growing, the ones that have gone through 2025 with growth and are continuing that in 2026, you can walk in and you can just feel that everybody knows what the plans are. It's visible. It's on the walls. It's on the desktops or the laptops or whatever they use. It's just part of the DNA of the company. And given that most recruitment companies have less than 10 staff, it's not difficult to get everybody on board with the same picture, with where they fit into it, and to be able to articulate what that means to the client and to the candidate and what their role is in it. So that's the question that often that causes, shall we say, much longer answers. And then also when you go out to the floor and start talking about it, you end up with lots of different answers, and that's not a good thing.
And that's a really big issue. I think the issue is that I tend to ask a leader, and this sort of gives you an idea of where the business actually sits. If you removed yourself from the business for 6 months, what would actually happen? Now, most leaders know the answer. It's not good. And most have never said it out loud. Most leaders are also not building to change this, which makes the leader the biggest threat to the business. And the leader doesn't address that threat. And at some point, it will become reality. And I've seen that happen over the last couple of years, that the leader is doing various different things, hasn't changed, and that's started the problem. So if you remove the business leader, what would happen? And I think this creates discomfort because it separates the leader from what the leader has built to
Yeah.
what they're personally carrying. Because a lot of them are still billing, a lot are still client
Yeah. Yeah.
relationships,
Absolutely
but
right.
and those are very different things. And most have never focused on or been forced to look at the difference clearly between what they've built and what they're carrying. And that discomfort is also about identity, because a lot of recruitment leaders, the business and the person are so intertwined, and that honest audit feels like a bit of an indictment against them and a bit of a push at them. And I think the real reason it lands hard is that most leaders know the answer. So the audit doesn't actually reveal anything new. It just makes it harder for them to ignore. And with the market now changing at the rapid rate it's changing at, I think the market was like an oil tanker turning. Now it's like a
Yeah.
speedboat zipping about. So especially those clients where automated and AI affect their workforce numbers, which affects their recruitment supply chain. The recruitment leaders are still sat at the bridge of their oil tanker and losing sight of their clients, who are now sat in their speedboat zipping about.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's the bit that we're not sort of seeing. We're not looking at that. And I think we've got to start to think that, it's a discomfort place. If you took the leader out, what would happen?
Yeah.
Because that
Yeah.
links directly back to your conversation about strategy and everyone understanding the strategy and being in line with that strategy. If the leader left and no one knows which way to go, then you've got a rudderless ship straight away, and
Yeah.
that's a real problem.
Yeah.
So again, we've seen leaders who genuinely believe their business is set up for growth. And I've seen this an awful lot over the last 5 years, because it's been such a fluctuating 5 years with COVID, etc. How often does the reality match the belief when you actually dig into it?
Well, if you're not firm with a strong strategic plan, even if it's a 90-day sprint and another 90-day sprint and another 90-day sprint, what tends to happen, Ad, is what you said earlier. People revert back to what they did before. And the market is changing. The candidate experience is changing. Everything around us is changing how we deliver what essentially is still the same service. So it is often the case that the previous approach doesn't work. So you've just got to have a plan where you know what you're doing and you know how you're going to get there. Because what I see is quite a few leaders are waiting for the market to recover before they invest in positioning. So they're not necessarily investing in their brand, in their capability, in their specializations in the way that perhaps they should, but they're hoping that the market will grow. So as the market grows, they will grow as well. Well, that's not the case. As we've seen from last year, there are many companies that are growing despite the market, in spite of the market. The market is just where we operate. We can still accelerate our growth, accelerate our positioning and our brand and our value to the market, whether the market grows or not. And if you get your positioning right, the old line again, if you don't position yourself in the market will position you. So the investing in growth is getting all of those things lined up, being able to articulate it, and then following that growth trajectory with your business.
I think what I typically find is a business is set up to maintain and not
Yeah,
scale.
yeah, that's
And
true.
that's their system,
That's
the
true.
team
Yeah,
structure, the
yeah,
client base. They're all calibrated about a current size of the business, not for the next size of the
yes,
business if you don't
yes,
grow. And that connects directly with that audit question that we've just asked, because most leaders never look at it through that lens. And I often ask the business leaders, what happens if your business doubles from a tech point of view, a training point of view, a GP point of view to pay for it? But most importantly, and this is the one that 90% of the leaders forget about from a client's billing point of view, most growth happens because of their clients. Head growth enables the recruitment business to grow. Your client's head growth grows, then you grow. But now there's a huge competitive advantage in growth is happening because clients are growing because they don't need the headcount to facilitate growth because they can use AI, they can use automation, and they are doubling their size quicker. Where us, who are looking at employment, okay, are now struggling
yeah,
because the clients are doing exactly the same as what we're doing. We're looking at AI and automation to do the heavy lifting of the remedial tasks. Our clients are looking at doing the heavy lifting for those tasks, and a lot of positions are disappearing. But we haven't really caught on to that yet, but that's actually what's happening. So, we've got to look at that. So I think belief in readiness of business growth is often based on the things that we've never worked before. So a strong client relationship, a reliable top biller to grow, a good market reputation. Those things are wrong, but none of those things indicate growth either. But that's the bit that we think is going to grow. That client's going to grow, that business is going to grow, that recruiter's going to grow, etc. So I think there's also a timing issue. Leaders tend to feel most confident about growth when it's going well,
yeah,
and
yeah.
nobody thinks it's going well at the moment. A lot of people are still in survival mode, which is often the exact moment when they should be actually looking to do something different. And I think germination of growth happens in those little dark hours. Before you actually see growth yourself, is what you've done before that happens, and that's doing it now. So most leaders are convinced that they are the one who need the most work, and they need convincing that they need the most work. And I think certainly at this stage, it's almost like a warning sign. The ones that come in and say they're close to growth and tell me they're ready for growth, they aren't. Those that come in and say, right, can you start to identify the gaps in my processes? Can you identify the gaps in this that can help me grow? They're the ones that you grow. And I think because when we talk about those dark hours of growth, sitting in those gaps, those are the elements that make growth either happen or growth stop. But it's in those
Yeah.
dark hours you have to change, you have to work. But we've got time to do that now because there is time to address it now. That's the issue. But if you try and address it once growth hits the light and we go 6 months' time and the market is really moving, if you haven't addressed it, you're so far behind. And that's the thing that not in addressing it in the dark periods properly will prevent growth when growth happens. You can see who's been gardening all weekend. Yeah, and it's exactly like
It's nice. Get out there.
yeah, but it's exactly the same. If you don't prep the ground properly,
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
then your flowers never grow. And if
That's
you're
right.
waiting for your flower to grow out of the ground, then you've got to do something to encourage it to grow bigger, better, stronger. If not, you've just got a horrible plant, and that's the problem that most people are looking at and not doing. So,
Yeah, I don't know why I'm on this actually, Hal, because the last time I bought a bonsai tree, I ran over it in the car. So it wasn't even one of those that I got home and it died outside Dunelm. That was it. We shattered the whole bag. So
I'm,
I'm
I'm
not the expert on that.
I'm saying nothing about that. So, if you're advising a recruitment leader today on where to focus their energy to get in front of growth that is happening right now, which part of the market would you be pointing them towards?
And this one is the old it's like the career ladder, isn't it? Grow if you look at growth like a ladder and you're going up, you've got to make sure that your ladder is leaning against the right wall. So you could be growing your contract numbers at 9% margins, Yeah, but that may not sustain your business over the years to come. So the sectors where I'm seeing most growth, retained search or retained business. So I would be advising, is it possible in the services that you provide with the people that you have, can you have conversations with your clients about retained business? I know we've covered this in the past, but that's one area. Providing teams of people. Whether that's in statement of works type work or whether it's just in teams of people, but package it up so that we can say to our clients, actually, you want three or four of these people, we can do it this way. Getting some advice about, of course, is important, but teams of people, embedded teams, there's a lot of growth in those areas. And advisory services. Can you talk to your clients about these are the trends that we see in the market? I know a lot of the bigger clients have and employ hundreds of people to provide them with that information. But most of our clients aren't the huge clients. They're not HSBC. They're not one of the big motor companies. They're not one of the big oil companies. They're smaller clients who rely on us for advisory services. And if you can badge that up well, you can really do well in terms of the value that you are seen to create for those clients. So they're the areas that I'm getting to focus the clients that I'm working with on.
So I'm going to give the obvious answer first, which is leading into next week's webinar, which is contract and temp. The flexible workforce is clearly the correct
Yeah,
answer because there's
yeah,
demand there, the margins there. And
yeah,
most perm agencies are sitting on relationships that could open that revenue stream, but they're going to have to start from scratch and they need to do a head start. But there's also good perm businesses that may be taking temp. And I think what we start to think about, and this is the bit that I've been sort of speaking very heavily with certain clients, is specialist and niche positioning within sectors that have talent shortages is where we should be focusing. And we discussed the candidate market last week, and that includes the generalist market that will recover, but it will recover a lot slower than those really deep markets where there's lots of talent shortages. The specialist markets are already moving, and the agencies with genuine sector depth are winning disproportionately business. So, especially if they're candidate led or retained led, because they're addressing the shortage needs now of their clients and getting paid to do so. So, if you look at Robert Walters as a prime example, okay, and I wrote a post on this on Monday after having
yeah,
a
yeah,
look at
yeah,
it, okay, their temp business was down 11%, their perm business was down 2%, their specialist fees was down 5%. Their recruitment outsourcing and retained was up 13%. But that was the same for quite a few of the businesses. The leaders getting ahead are also looking at sectors adjacent to their current niche rather than going deeper into that market that's still a little bit stuff. So lateral moves are opening up faster
yeah,
than
yeah,
vertical moves right now. So the honest answer is that the segment matters less. It's more about the leaders thinking. And I've seen businesses grow in terrible markets, as you said, and I've seen businesses shrink in great markets. The question is not really which part of the market should you be in. The question is whether the leader actually has the commitment to do something different. Those are the ones who are going to do something different, and they're the ones that will see growth.
And if you could add to that, and the ability to recognize the skills of the consultants that are talking to the market and do a training map to say, actually, we believe that you've been selling perm for a long while. We believe you can add the search to your portfolio, maybe just one or two, or maybe retained it in a slightly different way. But there will be upskilling that's necessary. And within your budget, you've got to make sure that you've got trained people who can do some of the new services. Because if you can't, they just become something on your website that you do, but actually nobody can sell.
Yeah, and I think you're right that we go back to that conversation about it's not about bringing new talent into your business. It's about retaining the talent that you've got and then training them to develop that to actually deliver more
Yeah,
from your existing client base, your lapsed client base, but also opening new client base. So that training and development becomes a real big question. And if you've got let's say you've got a set of billers, let's say you've got three or four billers all doing 120K, if you could get them to all grow by 10%, that's a big growth. You can
yeah,
get them,
absolutely.
if you can get them to growth by 20%, that's a bigger growth. Now, if you then look at your client list, and this is what normally happens, normally you retain 60% of your clients every year, and that 60% normally grows 20%
Yeah.
because they grow
Yeah.
bigger, etc. So they grow 20%. So you've lost 40%, you've gained 20%. So if you then start to try fill your 20% gap with new business, you're going to be in a standing position. If you try grow your gap by 40%, now you've grown by 20%.
Yeah.
But people don't see that. People don't understand that because they don't see the clients that have gone into lapse situation, and there isn't a genuine, true focus on opening new business with a proper strategy. And I think that's the bit. And I think the next question, we're going to come into that quite a bit, or especially I am, the way I'm going to answer the next question, because I think that's really important. So we work with leaders at every stage, solo operators right through the business of doing 5, 10, 20 million pounds of GP, not turnover, GP, where proper money is actually sat. Okay. What's the one thing that is growing faster, or what's the one thing that they have that's growing faster, have in common than the ones that are standing still and tend to be missing out on?
And for me, how this is a really easy answer. The ones that are growing faster have strong, focused leadership over everything else, over the market analysis, over data, over use of AI. It's having strong, focused leadership that's like the Brighton Rock. It's like the DNA through the business. And you can just feel it as you walk in. You can feel it in the conversations you have with the people. You can feel it in the support services conversations. There's a desire to be there. And the three C's that I've often spoken about, that the courage to make the right decisions and to do the right things at the right time, the curiosity as to, well, how do I get the best out of this? What's going on over there with my clients? Why is this happening? How can that benefit my business? As a leader, having that curiosity really helps you grow the business. And the third C, courage, curiosity, is culture. They've got a culture where everybody is wanting the business to improve, that everybody's working for everybody else as that real collegiate team atmosphere. And they're the businesses that are getting growth. Yes, they may be making best use of AI. Yes, they may be in the niche sector. They may be adding new services, but it comes from a strong, focused leadership. And that could be a strong, focused leader, one person leading the business, or it could be the right leadership team, that the founders or the MDs or the board and a really good second line where they're all committed to the same purpose, the same goals.
So I'm going to add a little bit to that and then give some sort of rhetoric around that. I think you're right. It's about strong leadership, but I think it's about making decisions faster,
Yeah,
not reckless
yeah,
decisions,
yeah,
but they have a clear bias towards action rather than retention, as in retaining the status quo. And I think one standing still are often brilliant at analysing their own situation and then get paralysed when it comes to acting on what they already know. And that connects back to our audit question because analysts without action is just a very organised way of staying in the same place. And I'll give you an example. I'm working with a client at the moment that's just past the £10 million GP mark, has compound growth over the last 3 years of between 20 and 30%, and are forecasting the same this year. Okay. The leader is taking absolute positive actions, and I've been brought in to help their senior leadership team's capabilities around winning more business from what they've already got, what they've identified as their strengths and weaknesses, and their processes and their client data. They're looking at how they can win new business. And I've been in 2 months, we've already identified over £2 million worth of opportunities sat in their own client base that they'd
yeah,
never seen before. We've discovered clients that are in their ICP. So we've removed those clients because actually when we looked at the time they spent with those clients and what was going on with those clients, they were actually losing money from working with those clients. And we've actually then looked at what a true ICP for them looks like. So they understand that the vast majority of their revenue discovery will not happen this year, but will happen in 2027. But now their focus is north of £15 million GP in 2027, and their goal in 2027 is to hit over £20 million GP. Now, like all agencies, it's not the size that's matter, it's the investment in their teams and themselves. So they're not cutting heads unless the heads are absolutely not on the plan. So they are growing their heads. And this is a deliberate plan that they treat development as a growth leader and not as a reward that good times are happening. So they're not bothered about whether it's a good time or a bad time. They see development as that growth lever, not about the good times. And they have a clear picture of what their business needs to look like in 18 months. And they are making decisions today that are pointing them in that direction. The ones that are standing still are solving the problems of the today, but with no reference of where they're going. And the leaders of businesses, and I'll use this, the leader of that business I'm working with, his eyes are very up and looking at the future. The rest of
Yeah.
his senior leadership teams were eyes were very down at looking at opportunities they can cure today. But once we started to lift their heads up out of the mire of recruitment that is at today, they could start to see the opportunities. They could also start to see where disasters were coming, and we've started to address those one things straight away. And I think they stop now waiting for permission, and they are listening to the marketplace and what's actually happening in their marketplace. And the ones that are growing have decided to stop waiting, as you said, for that moment to happen. And they're just now making it happen because they can see what's coming rather than just battling what's happening today. And most recruitment leaders are stuck in today's battle rather in what the
Yeah.
future is going to look like. And at some point, you're never going to get head above the parapet to actually see what tomorrow actually looks like at all. So, last question. Okay. We've both worked with leaders who've transformed their businesses in 90 days and others who've been talking about the same change for the last 2 years. What separates those two types of leaders, and what should someone listening right now ask themselves?
So I wrote down three things for this ad, and it's true of everything that I've seen. Firstly, the leaders that do it in 90 days or get traction in 90 days, they decide what they are not going to do. Because to do something new, you've got to stop doing something old. And leaders who are moving fast tend to say, okay, if we're going to go in this direction, we've got to jettison some of the things we're doing. You can't keep adding to the things that as a leader you're doing. So they know that this is what I'm not going to do in order to facilitate what I am going to do. The second one for me is they change their incentive structure first. It's no good as a business saying we're all going to go in this direction and these are the services we're going to supply, these are the conversations we're going to have, but we're going to reward you based on what we did in 2025 or 2024 or 2023. You've got to incentivize the consultancy. You've got to behave and act in the way that you want your business to develop. And we all know, we've all been there, commission conversations, compensation conversations are tough to have. But it's very important to get that on board early days before you set off, because otherwise you're incentivizing people on old behavior rather than new. And the last one, and I've seen this for those that can afford to do it, and they accept there's a short-term revenue dip as the cost of entry for accelerated growth. So they know they're going to grow. They know they're going to have to invest perhaps in new services or new ways or new training for their consultants. And they accept there's a cost to that. But like you said, they look ahead to 2020, end of 26, into 2027, and they can see the rewards. So they're not looking at it saying, well, we've only got this much money, this is all we can do. They're saying we're going to have to take a little bit of a hit for much more accelerated growth.
Do you know there's some comments in there that sort of I'm going back over the last sort of 3 or 4 weeks of working with clients where I've heard the same old comment of, why do you do that? because we've always done it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the ones who move fastest have reached a point of genuine clarity about what's not working, which is what you're talking about there. Not just awareness, but real clarity. And they're not trying to improve something from a vague point of view. They specifically know what has to change, and they know what's going to cost them in money and in time to change. And I think that's a very different position from most recruitment agencies who will buy a new piece of kit that has the process already in that piece of kit, and then they try and shoehorn their process into that kit and wonder why it doesn't work. So the ones that who stay stuck are usually carrying too many open loops. All of those sort of issues are all an open loop that they haven't closed. And when their priorities, let's say they've got three priorities, that becomes five priorities, then it becomes eight priorities, and then nothing moves because everything is of equal importance. And you talked about the 90-day plans. 90-day leaders have a focus on what needs to move today, and they focus on that one thing, do it, and do it really well before they focus onto something else. So those three priorities don't become five, don't become eight, and they're not all equally important. They're very different. And I think they're all willing to be uncomfortable early. And I think a lot of recruitment agency owners don't like being uncomfortable, but that uncomfortable sort of position is where things start to grow. They accept that the first week is it's about that real change, and it probably feels worse before it feels better because everyone's hankering back to the old systems and the old ways, which we know aren't working, but we allow people to step back into them. So they don't interpret the discomfort as evidence, they interpret it as it's not working, but then probably measuring it from the cash point, which is the last thing that actually goes up, rather than the action points that start to indicate what's moving. So the question someone should ask themselves right now is, how long have I known that that needs to change? And if the honest answer is you've known it for more than 6 months, then the question is not about the market or about the timing. The question is about why you're actually afraid to make the change.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think too many recruitment leaders are too afraid to make that change because it makes them look weak. No one else is doing it because the market is, I class a lot of the market is the sheep mentality. Everyone's following each other, but the ones that are going out on the low on a limb on their own are the ones that are creating true revenue and taking market share and market advantage because they're not stuck in that sheep mentality of we've always
Yeah.
done it like this, everyone
Yeah.
else is doing it like this, why should I change? And that is a huge differentiator in times like this where we know, looking at all the stats, that the market is starting to come up a bit. Okay, not a lot, but it's coming up a bit. And if it carries on, if you haven't changed, then the market will change you.
Absolutely right.
And I think that is the biggest thing. So next week, we're going to look at moving the needle further. And we're going to look at business model is only half the story and the cross stream revenue that most agencies never capture, why they never capture it. So it's a simple growth conversation, but it's the most ignored strategy in recruitment. Today, if you want a workbook on today's session, drop an email to info@Jump Advisory. There's a workbook and the audit on today's session. And all that leaves me to say is enjoy the weather. Hopefully it's going to stop and we can all stop melting. Uh, get out into your virtual garden and prepare for growth. Dave, thanks very much. Ladies and gents, thanks for your time. Much appreciated. See you all again next week.
See you soon, everybody. Bye bye.